name is Mark Lewis. I'm honored to be here tonight, kind of as the traffic cop to honor Dr. Happel. And we're really excited to do this because he wouldn't want us to. So we want to really pay a tribute to a guy who I've learned more about was really a quintessential Renaissance man. Just to keep up with his moving bills is just extraordinary. He was a father, a husband, a doctor, of course, as you know, a medical officer, administrator, friend to many, pretty good fisherman from what I hear, and not a bad free throw shooter. Made 26 in a row at the University of Wyoming, led the team in scoring his senior year with 17 points a game. Very accomplished athletically, as well as in the classroom and in the operating room. So we're going to start with a little tribute from Marty Breeden, who used to be the Vice President of Mission Services when Dr. Happel was at the hospital for 14 years, and he's going to play us kind of his opening tribute through song, and then we'll get on with the speakers tonight. Marty?
Thanks, Mark. Good evening, everybody. Just adjust this for a second. Back here for a second. Yeah. There it is. This will be perfect for everybody now that we get. Good evening. When Julie asked me to do the opening prayer, I went and got a second opinion from Dana, and Dana said, I don't think my dad would want an opening prayer. And so we settled on this, and I've got a couple of stories. First of a long line of many stories that we'll share about Dr. Happel tonight. A group of us met down at a little restaurant in downtown Chandler. It was the executive leadership team from the East Valley here, and we were there to mark a particular milestone that Dr. Happel was marking. Don't know what it was, but it was a significant one, and all of us from executive leadership chipped in and bought him a gift, and the gift was a cowboy hat. And it just brought, and when he put this cowboy hat on his head, he was back in Wyoming. He was a cowboy through and through, and I realized my eyes were open to see that Dr. Happel loved being a cowboy as much as he loved being a doctor. And I know that you had horses, several horses in Wyoming, and he loved to ride. And so rather than doing an opening prayer, I've decided to do an opening song in a spirit that I hope Dr. Happel would appreciate. It's a cowboy song. Give me land, lots of land with the starry skies above. Don't fence me in. Let me ride through the wide open country that I love. Don't fence me in. Let me be by myself in the evening breeze. Listen to the murmur of the cottonwood trees. Send me off forever, but I ask you please. Don't fence me in, just turn me loose. Let me straddle that old saddle underneath the western skies. On my cayuse, let me wander over yonder till I see the mountains rise. I want to ride to the ridge where the west commences. Gaze at the moon until I lose my senses. I don't like hovels and I can't stand fences. Don't fence me in. Now, if you know the words, we'll sing this one and do a little saddle thing like Dr. Happel would. You ready? Just turn me loose, let me straddle that old saddle underneath the western skies. On my cayuse, let me wander over yonder till I see the mountains rise. I want to ride to the ridge where the west commences. Gaze at the moon until I lose my senses. I don't like hovels and I can't stand fences. Don't fence me in. Don't fence me in. Don't fence me in. The last time I saw Dr. Happel was at Copper Springs at the retirement community where he lived. I was playing for a happy hour in December of 19, right before COVID. And I know that several people made the trip from Copper Springs. Can you just raise your hands? Where's the Copper Springs people? We're so glad that you're here with us tonight. And he happened to meet me at the front door when I was bringing in my equipment to play for the happy hour. And we talked a little bit about his plans for the family, Christmas, and we talked about me being retired and different things. And then, without really asking or anything, he reached down and picked up my gear bag and my microphone stand, and I picked up my guitar and my PA, and we headed up to the front of the stage. And once again, just like when I saw him in that cowboy hat, my eyes were open again to the true nature of Dr. Happel. And it really had to do with the way that, as long as we knew each other, he was always there to help me pick up my burden and walk along with me and carry that along, whether it was with the ethics committee and all of the end-of-life issues that I came to him for help with, or any question I had about medical procedures or that. But mostly in the hardest times, I just remember that Dr. Happel was riding right there beside me. And so I just say, Dr. Happel, happy trails to you until we meet again. And amen to that. Amen. I threw in a little prayer there. I do want to say a prayer, and it's a prayer for all of you. That, you know, Dr. Happel was so big about quality of care. And so I just pray that all of your eyes and minds and hearts are open tonight to hear the wonderful stories of Dr. Happel and have them inspire you to be even better caregivers than you already are. Amen.
Thank you, Marty. That was very nice. We're going to start with speakers who work with Dr. Happel at the hospital first, and then we'll move on to anyone in the audience who would like to come up and take the mic. And so let's pay homage to a man. In talking about a man of service, and being a flight surgeon in the service in Vietnam, I was fascinated by his book. It's a great read. It doesn't take that long. It's up front if you don't have a copy of it, to just kind of chronicle the story. And you can tell, Dana, your father being so modest, having to write this down. I could just see him going, I have to write this down. Then it was really a good doctor. Yes, you have to write it down. People want you to acknowledge it. So let's start off now with our opening remarks from Mark Slider, who's the president of the hospitals here, and then we'll continue with the speakers from the hospital system.
Thank you for all joining us today to recognize the legacy that Dr. Happel provided to our community, to our hospitals, to our caregivers. On behalf of the family, we just want to thank you for allowing us to pause and recognize Dr. Happel. Listen, I probably am the one that had the least interface. Unfortunately, he was active in our foundation and got his family active in our foundation, and I got to meet him a few times. But there's plenty of folks that probably Dave Covert's here that worked many years with him and led. Tim Bricker, I think Tim's going to come up and say a few words. Worked with him for many years. Linda's here, worked with him, probably many more. Or I guess a better word would be we worked for him, because the fact of the matter, he was such a leader in our organizations, the medical staff, just beloved by our medical staff, and just a tremendous individual. Just a little background, for those of you who haven't read the book, I mean, this was back in 1985 when he moved from Rock Springs to this area to practice. He practiced for a while in the area, became a leader in the medical staff, chaired the medical staff, and then had an injury and was going to transition over to something else. And I think Dave, maybe it was Dave that recruited him. Dave, did you put the first CMO in place? He's probably looking back there, and put a position in place because he needs some leadership. And Dr. Happel filled that and then some. And think about this, if you look back at the history of Chandler, look back at the history here at Mercy Gilbert, first of all, this was a pasture that we've all been standing in, and Dr. Happel started his leadership role. And really, Chandler was still just pretty much a community, local hospital. And now, because of his leadership in building the medical staff, building the quality of care, and the reputations of not only Chandler, but this campus as well, Chandler's one of the biggest hospitals in Arizona. It's one of the leading trauma centers, the busiest trauma center in Arizona, which Dr. Happel started us down that path. Dr. Happel was very involved in our palliative care program and that transitions of care into the home, and just many other things with research, our research that we do at both of these campuses, our intensivist program, just many other things that were instrumental in taking us from a good connection and community hospital to a full-service tertiary complex medical centers that you see today. And quite frankly, that was because of his legacy and leadership, and we appreciate that, and thank you again, once again, for the family for helping us recognize that today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Mark alluded to Tim Bricker, and we'll get Tim to come up here as well. I got to know Tim when I was on the foundation board, and we did a lot of the golf tournaments over at Ocotillo, and now it's the George Rosia tournament, which is 20 years in the making, and that's another story in and of itself. Because I played with George's son, Sean, barefoot in the last hospital tournament, so that was funny. All right, let's bring Tim Bricker up, and Tim, I guess people in the back are having trouble hearing, so if we could get up close to the mic, that'd be great.
Well, hello everyone. I'll get as close to this mic as I can. Can you hear me back there? George, can you hear me? All right. If I start to fade back from the microphone, jump up and down and I'll get closer. It's really an honor to be here and to see all of you and to have a little time to recognize Terry. Terry was a giant of a man, just a great friend and a great human being. So I'll tell some stories. What I will say is I know that we all sort of knew Terry from different perspectives. Some of us were family members, some knew him as perhaps their doctor, as a surgeon, as a physician colleague, maybe as a boss, I know, as a fishing buddy. Lots of different ways that we all knew Terry. For me, he was my chief medical officer here. I was the chief executive for the East Valley Hospitals. Terry was my CMO, and he was a critical professional partner and really a great friend for about 5 years or so. in Arizona for CHW and Dignity Health. I was thinking about Terry and thinking about some of the things that Mark said about the fact that he was a hand surgeon, and I think all of you know that he had to stop practice at some point due to an injury to his hand, which was sort of ironic. But it didn't stop Terry from having his hands in so much of what shaped the medical community in this region. And he left his fingerprints on these communities for decades to come. We used to talk about the fact that one thing that made Terry unique was that he had both the respect and the fear of the medical staff. And that proved to be very true, and it proved to be very valuable to me as the CEO of these hospitals. That fear and respect of the medical staff really helped us a lot. Let me tell you about that a little. Let me start with fear. Some of you may know, some of you may not believe this, but these creatures that we call doctors, they're not always on their best behavior. And Terry had a unique, and I must say, kind of a mysterious way of dealing with difficult physician issues. Honestly, I'm not exactly sure what he did, but this might be wrong, but it sure seemed to me that Terry would call a physician into his office to deal with some issue, and some difficult issue, and it seemed that often we would never see that person again. So I don't know what he did, but needless to say, physicians didn't want to get called into Terry's office. Let me talk about respect a little bit. Mark alluded to this. Terry always stood for what was right. Terry, he stood for what was right for the patient, for the friend, for family, for the community. For Terry, there was never a discussion about tolerating bad behavior or tolerating poor quality for the sake of patient volume or financial considerations. That was just not in his makeup. And he had no fear. He might have generated fear among many of us, but the guy had no fear. He would take on the hardest challenges, the most complex challenges, because they needed to be taken on. And I really appreciated that as his partner. His colleagues, both physicians and non-physicians, respected Terry tremendously for that fearlessness that he had. And he set a tone in this region for how we approach things in the East Valley. I know for a fact that a foundational part of the success of this organization and this health system in the East Valley and beyond is due to the fact that there's always been a real strong group of talented physician leaders here in the East Valley. Many of them, probably most, or maybe even all of them, are here with us today. These physicians as a group always stood for what was right. They did the right things. They wouldn't tolerate anything else. And Terry was, in so many ways, the leader of the pack. In some ways, he was the mob boss with respect to this group of doctors. But these physicians made this medical community really what it is. And Terry was the leader of that effort. The legacy that he leaves in this community will live on for a very long time. And I miss him a lot. For me, he was a great partner. For all of us, he was a great partner. He got the important stuff done in the East Valley, and stuff that nobody else could do. A couple of examples. Mark mentioned the development of the Level 1 Trauma Center at Chandler. We went from concept, an idea, to designation as a Level 1 Trauma Center in about a year and a half. Nobody can do that. That would not have happened without Dr. Happel's leadership. There were so many complex things that we had to accomplish. There was so much physician engagement and buy-in to that extremely complex strategy that we couldn't have done it without Dr. Happel. I remember, for example, that was at a time when the Barrow neurosurgeons had just come out to Chandler to provide community neurosurgery. We decided we needed to develop a trauma center, and we needed to do it fast because the competition was going to do it down the road. We didn't have time to ask anybody's permission. We didn't have time to communicate it. We didn't have time to get buy-in from the doctors that were going to support it. We just made a public announcement. We are opening a Level 1 Trauma Center. And the physicians who then had to provide trauma services said, "Are you, what?" We didn't come here to provide Level 1 trauma services. And Dr. Happel and Peg and others worked their magic, and we made it. And that would not have happened. We would not have a level 1 trauma center out here in this area if not for Dr. Happel's leadership. So that's an example. There are many others. I won't tell you more of them, but that physician engagement, the physician buy-in, the participation and leadership from this medical staff, these were all so essential to what we've become here. And Terry was able to accomplish those things better than anybody I've seen in 25 years of doing this work. He was a master and a great partner. He was also just really funny. You know, he was funny in his own sort of charming and sometimes clumsy ways. And most of the ways in which he was funny, I can't tell stories about in a public setting. But I will tell you a couple. I have to be careful in relaying even these stories. You know, those of you that went on the fishing trips with Terry, you know the stories I can't tell. Stories about things like clavicles, stories about things like EHR implementation somehow turning into dessert choices, and things about a la mode and pie. I mean, you know the things I can't talk about. A couple of things I will talk about. One, you know, he was a hand surgeon at heart, and Marty talked about Terry having your back and always walking with you. I had a trigger finger. Your finger gets caught, I had a little thing, and I knew Terry was a hand surgeon. I said, Terry, what do I do about this? He said, Tim, come to my office and I'll check it out for you. All right. So I went into Terry's office a couple of days later, and he wasn't just going to check it out, he was going to do surgery on it. He had his desk laid out with, you know, with whatever you cover a surgical table with. He had knives and equipment, and he was going to do surgery on it. And I said, Terry, we're not doing surgery in your office. So he gave me a cortisone shot and took care of me, and it was great. So he really did. I took that as a reflection. One, he was a surgeon at heart. Two, he loved that work. Three, he took care of people. That's what he loved to do. And the other story, this one, I wish there was a button I could push bleep, because there are certain words I can't say. But I was in a meeting, I hadn't been here very long, and we were in a meeting with a group of OBGYNs. It was here at Mercy in the boardroom. And there are times when the OBGYNs would get a little excited about things. And in this meeting, they were very excited about things. They were a lot of talk, a lot of fighting, a lot of conflict. Terry, as many of you know, he didn't hear very well. He just couldn't hear. And I'm sitting next to him, and I'm the new CEO, and Terry leans over to me, and he says, he thinks quietly, in my ear, he says, these bleepin' OBGYNs. The whole room heard him. And you can imagine what bleepin' was. But Terry, you know, because of that combination of fear and respect that he had among the medical staff, only he could get away with that. You know, and it was fine. Everybody knew Terry, everybody loved Terry, and he was so influential. He was a great CMO, he was a great partner and friend, a man who left a remarkable legacy on the medical community of Phoenix, and it's just my honor to recognize him today and say hello to the family and to all of you, and thank you for being here. Thank you.
Very nice, Tim. Bleep and bleep. Yeah, you could probably substitute a couple of appropriate words. I'd like to bring up our next speaker. Happens to be a personal friend of mine, Dr. Gary Nagamoto, who was very close to Terry, especially as he was transitioning. Gary's a highly acclaimed pulmonologist, worked in the hospital system here for many years, and he's a better golfer than I am, which isn't saying much, Gary.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks everybody for being here. I know this is really special. I also know I'm not supposed to say the word honor. I'm supposed to use celebratory. I'm going to mess that up somewhere along the way here. I had a lot to say, but looking around, I think I'm going to shorten this a bunch. First thing I want to do is thank Mark for helping out here. Mark mentioned that he's honored to be here, and I just want you guys all to know that Mark over the years has helped the foundation, helped the community, helped all of his friends in a way that I think we ought to change the pro bono to pro Mark. He's been so good about everything here. It's special. You know, I look out here right now, we're talking about Terry, and you're going to hear a lot of good stories about him. Or you guys all have your own good stories from what I'm seeing. I bet all of you guys knew Terry. speak to what Tim had mentioned, one of the things that I'm always impressed by, even talking to some of his best friends I've known forever, Ed Fenstermacher and his family, when we talk about it, I'm always impressed by how they'll tell me, people will come up to them and tell them a story about Terry. They didn't know it. And that's just Terry. I mean, he's an incredibly modest guy. He obviously did incredible things for communities in Wyoming, Vietnam, and here. And I literally think there are millions of people that have been affected by what he's done. And it's just good to see all you guys here. If you want to know stories, you're going to hear a lot if you ask around. His autobiography, again, as Tim mentioned, I literally told Terry this is way too modest. It's a great story, and everybody should read it. You'll be better for it. But there's a lot between the lines, and I encourage all of you who are out here who haven't heard enough stories to ask his friends and family. And there's just a lot out there. I'd like to thank his family. Terry being the man he was and a physician, they had to sacrifice. He was, I'm sure, all hours of the day, spending time. His wife, Joan, who was amazing. His daughters, his grandkids, and his great-grandkids. We all owe them a thank you for sharing Terry with us. I just want to say that I'd like to give them. I had a long spiel because I was trying to think about a way of honoring Terry, and I know we're not supposed to be doing that, but that's just the fact. And as I thought a lot about it, I realized that one of the most important things that I think Terry gifted all of us, both known and otherwise, is the way he lived his life. And you're going to hear it over and over. Tim already spoke to it. I think all of us will speak to that. There were a couple things that I really take home, and I think that if we take that to heart, if we look at what Terry, how he lived his life, if we embrace that, if we pass that on to our family and our loved ones, that's the best way to honor him. Two things about Terry that really impressed me over all these years is that one is he had a love for life and learning. To his last days, he was still reading and learning. I think if you take that to heart, every day there's something to learn. Learn something new about your loved ones. Learn something new, physical activities to do. I get a kick out of seeing Julie's son playing basketball and the new dribbles he's learned, the new shots. Read a book, open a door to a new world that might change your world. That was Terry. To the last day, he was always invested in learning something new. The second thing is something that Tim spoke to, and I think it's just the amazing thing about Terry and a lot of the folks here that are his good friends. I think we all appreciate that Terry just did the right thing. I mean, that was Terry. And I talk to kids nowadays, and I try to explain what that means. It doesn't mean getting likes on Facebook because you've said something. It doesn't mean all the social media stuff. It means knowing what the right thing is to do and doing it. It means that if you do something and no one knows about it but your grandparents, they're going to look and they're going to smile at you because you did the right thing. And that was Terry. Through and through. I mean, as you've heard from Tim, and I'm going to tell you, there are hundreds and hundreds of stories about that. And I promise everyone here, I hope there's some young people here, and I hope you pass it on to your kids. If you do those things, at the end of the line, you're going to be the best person you could be. Your family's going to be in a better place. This community is going to continue to grow and be one of the best places to be around in the world. I've been searching around the world, find a better place, and I'm going to tell you, this is an awesome place. Doing what that is, living those things like Terry has. In the long run, you look up in the sky, and Terry's looking down, and you've been doing that, you'll get a smile. So again, I just want to thank everyone for being here. I appreciate that, and I know we're not supposed to be honoring him, but we really are honoring an incredible, great man. Good man, so thank you.
Thank you, Gary. We'd like to move on and bring up Dr. Patel. Also very close, as everybody on staff was with Dr. Happel. And real quickly, before he comes up here, one of the best parts in this book is Terry talks about when he's a freshman at Iowa State and they're playing Kansas. There was a guy by the name of Wilt Chamberlain on Kansas's team. And Terry was just like awestruck. He walked up to him after the game and he said, "My face was nipple height with Will Chamberlain, because Will Chamberlain was 7'1". Even though Terry was 6'2", he still was shorter. Dr. Patel.
That reminds me, I actually felt the same way when I met Terry. Terry was a rock. I joined the medical staff many, many years ago when he was still practicing as a handster. And honestly, whenever you called him on a consult, he was right there for you. And he was very clear on what he wanted to do and how he did it. And he was, oh, come on, you can't hear me? Let's just give up on this mic. Anyway, yes, he was a rock. He was a very special physician. And when he transitioned to becoming the chief medical officer, I was so proud to be one of the people that actually interviewed him for the job. Can you imagine that? That was because he had already kind of finagled me into becoming a chair of medicine by that time. So I was chair of medicine, I was part of the MEC, and ended up having to interview Terry for the job. And I'm like, come on, is there anybody else who can do this job better than you? No, there wasn't. And Terry was very, 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 very special to all of us. I was just going through his book a little bit, and I opened a passage where he said his office was like the psychiatrist's office. It was the principal's office. You know, it was a place where you went when you did something wrong or something like that. You know, I've been to that office in many ways, and I used him as a psychiatrist. He even told me off once or twice. He called me in a couple of times to basically tell me to get rid of a couple of people. So, Tim, that's where they went. If you didn't know. Yeah, we did get rid of a few people, so that was a good thing. But yes, his main thing was we want the best for everybody. And he was not somebody to shy away from mentoring people. And I can safely say that he mentored me in my leadership roles over the years. And finally, when I decided to cross over to the dark side and become part of administration, he was there to support me. It was a great journey, and I look back and look at Terry's life, and you know, I just want to be a fraction of what he was as a giant of a man, a giant of a physician, a giant of a person with a great big heart. So I'm glad we're all here to celebrate his life, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak a little bit.
Next, we'd like to bring up Dr. Beese, who has a very strong relationship with Terry, obviously, in the same capacity, and I know he's got some great stories as well.
Wow, it's so great to see everybody here. I've been on staff here for 24 years, and to see this group of usual and old suspects that have been around over the years. Of course, Terry's wonderful family, who I've gotten to know very well, but a lot of the leadership, physicians, and friends that have been around that I've gotten to know. I think it's just wonderful to get to see everybody. There's been a lot of talk about his athletic prowess and what he did as a college athlete in basketball, and it may be kind of a generational sentiment, but I have a quote from John Wooden. Those of you who might know, he was probably the best basketball coach in college and ran a series of wins out of titles at UCLA. But what he said is, be more concerned with your character than your reputation. Your character is who you really are, while your reputation is merely what people think you are. And so I think that's a standard that's probably a code that generation back in the 60s was brought up and lived by, and I think it characterizes at least a little bit of Terry's purpose and attitude. So I met him in around year 2000. I'd been on staff for a couple of years and was looking at starting a heart program at the hospital, and Terry was CMO back then. You know, I got to know him and really impressed by some of the accomplishments that he had already brought to bear, and some of those have been already discussed: the wound clinic, the CME program, palliative care, setting up the institutional review board and research at the hospital, and then directing a number of other projects, including the one that I was involved in the cardiovascular program. He was a great mentor and friend. He helped us set up a new cath lab at the hospital. And so I'm talking a little bit about some of my personal experiences early on with him. The CVOR, helping assemble our co-management group with Heart Health Organization. And then there is actually a picture of some of us who were involved in that still hangs in the cardiac short stay unit at the hospital, for those of you who ever have a chance to go up there, with Dr. Happel sitting in the middle when we opened our third cath lab up there, and we had started our co-management group, and has a bunch of the cardiology leaders here, some of them are here in the audience as well. So I think, you know, it's one of the aspects of my work with him that I was really proud of. He was always available, had an open door policy, as I think a lot of the administration of the hospital has always had. I think that's probably part of the success, is the relationship that the hospital and Terry had with the physicians. And I was always interested in his leadership style. You know, I thought he was kind of unique, but he brought sort of an appreciation and integration of the physician perspective into all the administrative decisions that went on at the hospital. And I would dare to say that that was possibly one of his secrets, one of our secrets to success at our hospitals. So the respect and fear thing, I think that's true. However, I always found him to be a kind, warm, intelligent, engaged, funny guy. So I think it just depends on if you're on his good side or his bad side. He's probably one of the few people that didn't get called in his office for an issue. And I'll talk about that in a little bit in a second. For those of you who knew him well, he did have some colorful language, usually behind closed doors, but it did sneak out occasionally, as Tim mentioned, in meetings and so forth. You know, he had really cool fish in his office. He had a fish tank in his office that many of you remember. I think Dr. Patel has now carried on that tradition, because he has the biggest fish tank in the hospital. Much bigger than the one that Terry had. But he was usually, when you go in there, he'd start feeding his fish while he was talking to you. So, over the years, I learned a few other things from Terry: how to drink vodka martinis, playing craps in Las Vegas, fishing in Montana, and then I was invited a few times to play golf up in his getaway house up in Payson, which was a huge amount of fun, and other stories that I can't tell you what happened after golf. Great times up there. You know, as a personal thing, professionally, he was very supportive of me as a clinician and took an interest in my leadership development, as well as many of us who are here. To his credit, he actually selected several of us to go through a program that Dignity Health had put into place called the Physician Leadership Development, with the idea of getting more doctors who were out in practice and understood the world of medicine be part of how hospitals are run. And so Dr. Patel, who was one of his attendees, Dr. Tomich, who runs our internal medicine program, Dr. Glenn Tiffany, who's now the Chief Medical Officer, Physician Executive for the Arizona Division, and myself, were all people who went through that leadership program. And as Y had probably mentioned, we all drank enough of the Kool-Aid and decided to take the leap into administration. So I give him a lot of credit for the jobs that we ended up taking on, and some pride in the work that we've been able to carry on with his influence. In 2015, he announced his retirement and made the suggestion to me that think about throwing my hat in the ring, is competing for the CMO job. I don't know if I should be happy or mad that I actually got the job, but he kind of pushed me in that direction, and you know, big shoes to fill. But I've been really happy with the opportunity to continue to build a legacy out here in the East Valley hospitals. And we've already accomplished great things, and we're still moving to accomplish even greater things. One of the other things I would say is he did help me. Probably one of the most important things is how to deal with physician behavior issues, and that's come up a few times. So believe it or not, he had a little cheat sheet that he gave to me, and I still use it. So, and I'll tell you what it is. So I'm giving away secrets now, but the first aspect in a conversation when something's come up that doesn't sound good is just try to get a description of what happened, kind of go through the details, accept it, probe for more information, and then get some kind of recognition of what actually happened, some acknowledgement of that, and some agreement about it. And then from there, get some idea of what the next steps might be, put those down on paper, offer some organizational support if it's needed, if someone needs help, and sometimes it's something that's going on in the physician's life. It's not a inert bad person, but something that's happening to him that's influencing or her the way that they're acting in the hospital, and they need help with that. Let them know that there's no retribution if people have, brought this to light, that they don't go back and go after those people, and then have some follow-up. And believe it or not, it works. And I'd say surprisingly, people that have gone through that, and even myself, a lot of the physicians actually walk out happy that they had the meeting, and typically we have a success story on the other end of it, for the most part. So, although some people we do get rid of if they don't behave. So anyway, not an easy task. So anyway, just in conclusion, Terry was, smart, funny, engaging, unafraid to speak his mind, highly principled, and you could always count on him to do the right thing. He was really more interested in being a person of value than taking credit for the work that he did, and I think that was important. He really, I have to say, we're all grateful for what he's done, what he's contributed, his life and his legacy. So thank you all for the opportunity to speak, and enjoy the rest of the night. Take care.
All right, we'd like to bring up Dr. Tiffany now. Can you even see out there? I know you can't hear anything. So when you come up here, just get right on top of this microphone. Wake people up.
Hey, so I will tell you the first time I met Terry. What's that? Am I close enough? No. I'll get loud. All right. So I first met Terry almost exactly 20 years ago to the day. The Chandler had decided they wanted to change emergency medicine groups, and a group of us, some of which are out in this audience, decided that we could pull that off. And half of us didn't even live in the state, so we were selling some real soap. We had the hubris at the time to think we could do this. And so the first time I met Terry was in his office with Keith Butler, one of my former partners, and we sat in those chairs. And I don't know if you've been in that office when Terry had it set up, but it was a little close. And you had the two chairs sitting there, you're kind of back against the wall. The oddly vertical fish tank was right there, by you, very bubbly. And if you were sitting in the inside chair, which is where I was, it was a little noisy, right? Always a few fish flakes on the desk right there, right? And he hardly said a word from almost the entire meeting. Keith and I sat there and threw our pitch to him. And he just sat there and kind of, stared at us and listened. And when we were done, and I'm starting to sweat now because this guy's asking me no questions, right? And he just looks at me and he says, "Do you really think you can do this?" And at the time I'm like, "Well, I wouldn't be sitting here." And he's like, "I like that answer." Just that was it. He said, "Go sell yourself to those guys across the hall." I was talking about Mr. Covert and the rest of the PEG and the rest of admin over there. So we got the contract, amazingly enough. So that inside chair, which was kind of scary the first time I was in there, I felt he was kind of an intimidating guy when I first met him. I came to love sitting in there. His office was always open, as people have said. You could drop in and talk to him anytime about just about anything. He, like many people in this audience here, he mentored me. I thought I knew a lot about leadership. I'd done physician leadership before coming down here. But I found out from Terry that I didn't really know very much. Right? I learned a lot from him. Probably, two of the best days that I've spent ever fishing were spent with him. He was on several trips that we took, and I had the absolute privilege of getting to spend 2 different days on 2 different trips alone with him on a boat, with just me and him and a guide, and just listening to his stories as a physician and what he did coming up in the medical world was absolutely amazing. He had some just toe-curling Vietnam stories, and thinking about what he did and how he got to where he was always very moving to me. A very warm guy who was always good to me, and I really appreciate that I got to know him. He was a consummate physician, a true professional in the old sense of the word to me, right? A true professional. And many of us here owe a lot to him, to where we are, what we do, and he built, in many ways, he was hugely instrumental in building these hospitals. I started here in January 1 of 2003 as a ER doc, and this was Chandler Regional Hospital, part of CHW. It has, grown in size almost a full order of magnitude, and it was Terry in many ways along the way that carried so many of those things. So appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys for a minute, and just to pay my respects to Terry, because he was a great mentor and someone I was proud to be able to come with. Thank you.
All right, people are coachable. Got right up against the microphone. I'd like to bring Linda Hunt up, who's a longtime cohort with Dr. Happel, and instrumental, and I'm going to bring the microphone down a little bit, Linda. You can just get right. Do I have to go to HR because of that?
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me in the back? Yes. Good. So I'm going to come at it a little bit different way. When I first met Dr. Happel, I was assuming the role overseeing all of the hospitals in the metropolitan Phoenix area. And so I met him and sat next to him many times in meetings, at retreats, and the board meetings. And for some reason, he loved to give me a hug. I think it's because I was so short, and I was a little short and huggable individual. But he would always have a joke for me. And the thing that I loved about him was when he knew you liked to laugh, or he knew you needed a laugh, he would get this little glint in his eye. The family, do you know that little glint? And that little turned up smile, and many times it was only on one side, that he was getting ready to tell me something that would make me laugh. So he was a warm individual that I loved to be around. Many times I intentionally sat next to him, and he would have a running dialogue under his breath about what was going on. I agree that I heard his office called it a lot of things. I told him it was the woodshed that he had to take people to and get their behavior corrected, or we would then figure out what was the next step. So he was a lovely individual. He was a great doctor. We've talked about his quality concerns and how he was a genuine individual who only wanted the best. And he became a friend, and he was a wonderful administrator and a wonderful individual to be around. So thank you to his family for sharing him with us. Thank you to all the physicians who worked with him, and all of us learned from him. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. It was very nicely done. I'd like to bring up our next speaker, Dr. Paul McHale. Paul, have you been to the woodshed, Paul?
Yes.
Okay. I figured so, but it's easier coming from you.
All right, I hope I am loud enough. Very honored to be here and speak of T-Haps, which I was always happy to call him. I was medical director back in 04, 05, young, very impressionable, and scared of Terry. And when I became medical director, my first few office visits to Terry's office, now hallowed ground, I was shaking. I barely remember the meetings, and I would walk out of there, and Patsy would look at me and be like, "You did okay." And I'd be like, "All right, good." So on the third meeting, I actually noticed he had these fly fish. I'm a huge fly fisherman, and he had that picture. I think it's on the, and you can probably, is it on the Smith or the Boulder River? One of those rivers. And it was shortly after I'd gotten back a trip that Mr. Covert used to do, a tuna fishing trip. And I was in there, and I kind of changed the subject and said, "Hey, Terry, how about I'm going to do an ER trip fly fishing up in Montana, and would you go?" And he goes, "Well, yeah, I would go." So that's how this fly fishing trip up to Montana, this yearly event, started. And the first year we went up, I think there was 4 of us. There was Brian Tiffany, Keith Pereira, nicknamed Perky, myself, and Terry. And we stayed in this, it was October in Montana. It got cold early. We had lots of snow. The fishing was not good that first year. And Perky was really, really nervous. He had not interacted with Terry very much. And Terry's reputation was there. I mean, it was one of those where he just cast a big shadow. So the first night, Keith was so nervous to be hanging around Terry that he got, well, we all got a little saucy, but Keith was like really saucy. So the next morning, Keith wakes up and I'm making breakfast, and he walks out and he's a little bit kind of shy, and he goes, "Did I make an absolute fool of myself last night?" And I'm like, "No." And he goes, "Well, is Happel gonna think less of me?" I'm like, "I don't think so. He bought you the last 2 shots you drank." So that was Terry. Terry made you feel comfortable in your own way. Terry, if you were honest to Terry, Terry would repay that with respect and with friendship. And everybody wanted to have Terry like them, everyone. Everyone really wanted to have Terry respect them. That was one of the things, when you got that respect from him, you felt larger than life. And I consider myself so lucky that I came around Chandler during the time that he was there. I feel sorry for the people that weren't able to interact with him on a professional basis, because he was a giant among all of us physicians out here. My hunch is, if you asked every single doctor sitting here today, that we all consider him a mentor. But my hunch is, if you asked Terry if he was a mentor to all of us, he would say no. I think he would sometimes deny that. My favorite personal moment with Terry was we had a day on the river. The fishing was atrocious. We knew it was going to kind of be bad. It was just one of those days that you could tell in the morning. So I had packed a bottle of vodka and shoved it deep in the cooler, and it was ice cold. And about 6 hours in, we hadn't caught squat. And Terry looks at me and goes, "Well, this day sucks." So I opened up the cooler and pulled out the bottle, and we sat and we drank most of that bottle for the next couple hours. Didn't catch any other fish. And when we were getting off the water, so for those who don't fly fish, when you get up, like you pull up the boat, the guide usually goes and grabs the truck. So you got about 5 minutes there. You're sitting there by the river, and Terry puts his arm around me and goes, "Well, at least you had the goddamn foresight to bring a bottle of vodka." So I have no doubt that Terry and Joan are on a nice drift boat with the dries hatching and fish rising, and Terry, I'm sure, has a vodka martini. So he will forever remain in our memories, and I think his shadow will always bask and keep the East Valley remembering him. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. I'd like to bring up Sharon Resnick. If you don't know a lot about Dr. Happel, but I imagine most of you do or you wouldn't be here, palliative care was one of his greatest joys, and that's what we're going to hear about right now.
Hello. Whether it was a staff meeting or an interview for a new hire or a meeting with HR, Dr. Happel was always there for the palliative care department. I'm very grateful. He was extremely encouraging as he supported and motivated me during my first year as manager. I never understood how he stretched his time to be there for us. I believe his hour had 75 minutes. He was a quiet supporter. He was there for you, but he let you lead. His presence spoke volumes. Dignity Health, then was CHW, anticipated that the baby boomers were a sophisticated group of consumers that would be demanding good health care at the end of life. The palliative care program started in all Dignity Health hospitals in 2004. Dr. Happel was given the task to pioneer the movement in our hospitals in the East Valley. At the time, he really didn't even know what palliative care meant. But he took on the task with confidence and strength. He researched and attended conferences to educate himself. He taught us how to develop a successful team. He believed that it was important to have administrative support, excellent communication skills, regular meetings. He also wanted us to have an annual team building event and the involvement of the hospitalist. He was very proud of the program and started our yearly conference off with the development of the service and how funny that he, a hand surgeon and CMO, would be the one who built this program. The program has grown into one of the most successful and productive teams in the Dignity Health. We're always asked to present and provide best practice to other hospitals among Dignity. We help over 4,000 patients and families every year, and the success is evidenced by the numerous letters that the department receives from families thanking the team for helping them during some of the most challenging times of their life. I looked over some of Dr. Happel's presentations, and I would like to leave you with a quote that he would always put at the end of his presentations. He said it was and it was by Dr. Edward Trudeau. To cure sometimes, to relieve often, and to comfort always. I would like to thank the Happel family for this wonderful evening, and I hope you find comfort from Dr. Happel's impactful legacy. Thank you.
He's saying stop already, but we're not going to stop. We're not done yet. Our next speaker is going to be our final speaker in the hospital market segment. Julie Alvarado, Chief Philanthropy Officer and my good friend who always manages to stage great events and raise a lot of money for the hospital. Julie.
Thank you, Mark. I'm glad I finally made status of real good friend. And I would be remiss if I didn't stop 1 second and thank Mark Slider for having the vision and hosting us today. And certainly have to thank the foundation staff and our hospital volunteers that are out here, the real workers on these events. I'm going to add my thanks to the family, but I'm not going to look at my good friend Tanner. I won't make it. It's so special of you guys, all of you, to allow us to share in this day with your family. We all know each and every one of us have been blessed by the life and legacy of Dr. Happel. And as we've heard, not only a legacy of, and it's a long list now, kindness, goodness, certainly incredible clinical knowledge, vision, but also an incredible history and legacy of provision. Dr. Happel and his beautiful wife Joan and his entire family have been so generous to this hospital. Both our physician giving society and our palliative care family room, happens to be upstairs right here, are named for his work and in honor of his generosity. The Richards have also honored him by naming a sports medicine endowment fund that will provide into the future. I was blessed to be at that ceremony, and he was so pleased. I'm not looking at Dana. Okay, we're going this way. Alexis and Garrett, pretend I'm looking at you. I just can remember his smile and how much he was beaming. He was so thankful and he was so pleased that you named that in his honor. We counted on him as an outstanding clinical leader. We counted on him for his vision of healthcare, everything right where we stand. We counted on him for his leadership, as you've heard many people recount. And we've counted on him also as a philanthropist. He was a supporter, he was a public speaker, and yes, he was even one of our key historians. So even though Dr. Happel now dwells with the Lord, I know he dwells in your heart and in your spirit as well, and his spirit of generosity will live on for so many generations to come. I made it, Dana. Thank you.
All right, so there are many people who did work with Dr. Happel at the hospital proper. So we're going to start the second segment of this tribute to truly a Renaissance man with Jim Hayden. And Jim did work as an outside vendor significantly with Dr. Happel. But then if you would like to come up and make a few comments about how he impacted your life, if you're from Copper Springs, you happen to be a friend, you're a fisherman, he poured you tequila one night and we haven't met you yet, we would love to hear from anyone at that time. Jim?
Dr. Happel had a very special place in my heart. Those of you who don't know, in 1987, when I was 20 years old, he operated on me, Dana. 1987, when I was 20 years old, your father operated on me, which was 35 years ago. And 35 years ago, I didn't have really good use of my left hand. For those of you who did not know that. And it's been, or my brain, you're right. So he was a special dear friend, and never told the story. And those of you who know the story, it's something I take very near and dear because I have still limited use of my left hand, but he made it much better than it is this today. And if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be where I am today. Obviously, he was one of the physicians that recruited me to the board 25 years ago. And seeing many friends here today and many of the previous CEOs here has been a true honor and a blessing. And I love you, love your family. Jim, thank you for taking care of her. And thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you.
So would anybody else like to come up and say a few words? The mic won't bite. I can just tell you in this interlude, I had an opportunity to visit with Dr. Happel right after Joan went into a group home, and we spent some time at his home. And we talked a lot about sports, because for many years I was a sportscaster. And he had some great stories. I mean, he loved baseball and he loved basketball. He excelled at both. And I think, like many of us who had a little bit of game in sport, we thought, well, maybe we could make it to the show. Well, his family is graced with a Major League Baseball pitcher who's sitting right here, and AJ. So he got to live the dream through them. But I like his modesty, but I also like the fact that he wasn't afraid to put someone in their place if they needed to be put in their place. because as Gary said earlier, he walked the walk and he talked the talk. So he wasn't a phony. If he was going to dress you down, he would dress you down and be appropriate. So I had a brief time with him, and it was very impactful, and I'm very glad that Dana shared him with me. And if you would like to share your story, come on up. I know there's several people here at Copper Springs. Dave Covert, so he's coming off the bench. He's a short right-hander. He's got a good fastball. His curveball's kind of left him a little bit, but no, he's a former administrator at the hospital, very close with Terry. Dave?
Thank you. I didn't expect to be up here, but it's an honor to be here with paying respect to Dr. Happel. You know, I had his remembrance laying out on my desk at work, and somebody had come into the office before I had gotten there and took the opportunity to read through his remembrance, and she looks at me, she says, "You remember that Dos Equis commercial? The world's most interesting man? Well, he's the real deal." And so, anyhow, you know, the first time I really got to know Dr. Happel was on the golf course, and I knew him to be a larger-than-life, very serious man, and part of the foursome was a board member who was the real knucklehead. I thought, you know, this isn't going to be a good combination with Dr. Happel, but it all worked out well. But after that, I got to know him a little bit, and over the years, the respect for him grew. His leadership was so outstanding. I remember a time when there was a lot of turmoil at the hospital, and the medical staff was really at odds with the administration, and one of the chief of staff resigned, and Dr. Happel was picked to take over, and that made him a board member at the time. And I remember the first meeting that we were at with Camille, who was the chair of the board. Terry and her sat together and calmed the waters as though the two of them had worked together for 10 years. It was a remarkable impact that he had, and as a lot of people have mentioned, one thing I really loved about Dr. Happel was you didn't have to strip off any veneer off of him to see where he's coming from, and I always respected him for that. And you know, just really not much to add to everybody's touched on the programs he developed. He, you know, the palliative care stood out for me because it was something that was sort of put on us by the sisters, and he studied it, as was said, and fell in love with it, and did an outstanding job with it. And so anyhow, again, Dana, thanks for sharing your dad with us. Just feel honored to have been mentored by Dr. Happel over the years. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Are there any family members who would like to get up and say something before Dana does? Okay, Dana, I guess it's your turn. Dana is Dr. Happel's daughter, and she's a good personal friend of mine. And she's written a very sweet tribute to her father, and she's going to do a great job.
Yeah, right. I think I do. As long as I can see, 'cause it is dark out here now, right? All right. So, does anybody want to know what it's like to be Dr. Happel's daughter? So does anybody want to know what it's like to be Dr. Happel's daughter? Yeah, exactly. Well, so it's been amazing, and it will always be amazing. He certainly was an amazing man. Most of us know how accomplished he was, right? I mean, I don't need to reiterate all that. You know, Dad was, and what he achieved, as we all have heard tonight, is, you know, look at him. It's like, wow. I mean, you know, what accomplishment do you do? What a total success story for a man like him, right? So, you know, if any of you wondered how he was at home, he was just a dad. He was just a dad. He was my dad.
Did he like to barbecue?
He did.
Was he good?
Yep, he was good. Thank you. Yeah, he was good. He did. He enjoyed cooking. He enjoyed barbecuing. He enjoyed having family, friends gathering. He actually did laundry, believe it or not. He did laundry. He also would run errands, go to the dry cleaners, vacuum.
He gave you a cigar when you were 11?
And he did. He gave me a cigar when I was 11, and my mom pretty much thought that was a form of child abuse at that point. But we didn't really go there, so we kind of left that there. But he would, you know, he would attend my sister and I, you know, our sporting events. She and I were very athletic. And he was the unassuming, quiet, you know, gentleman sitting there next to the lady screaming her head off, which was my mom. And, you know, my dad never yelled, ever. I don't think he ever yelled even at me when I probably totaled a car. He never yelled. But, you know, it was, at my house, it was more like wait till your mom gets home. It wasn't wait till your dad gets home kind of thing. So, anyway, you know, just the way it was. So a funny story. So my sister and I were both swimmers. Tracy became, you know, a very good diver, and we were at a swim meet, and I was, you know, swimming, and you know, my mom, you know, was yelling, and I'm under the water. My mom's going, "Go, Dana, go!" So I stopped, and I'm like, "Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad." You know, and I'm like 7, so apparently, you know, I was in first place, but then I came in dead last because I stopped to say hi to my mom and dad, and thank God it was only 7th time. He was a guy, you know, also at the age of 5. He said, "So Dana, do you want to go snow skiing with me tomorrow?" And that was something I always wanted to do, and I had not been. And I said, "Of course, I would love to go." So he and I drove. It's about an hour and a half out of Pinedale, Wyoming, which was halfway between Rock Springs, Wyoming, and Jackson Hole, where we grew up. So he and I, you know, head out, and it was a tiny little mountain, a few runs. It was a pommel lift. It was basically a little saucer that kind of scooted you up on the hill. No chairlifts at all. So we go up on the bunny hill a couple times or two. So we get up there, and I apparently was dragging. I ended up where I was dragging my ski, and I got my leg caught up in the ski. So my dad said, you know, he said, "Just drop your ski," and he like just scooted me off onto the side, and my knee was like on the side of my kneecap. And my dad said, "Just hold tight," and he just snapped my knee right back into place. And I'm like, holy right? At the age of 5. And then he gave me a shot of tequila, and he said, "We're going to go into the bar." Yeah, that's pretty much what he said. And that's when my mom said, "Okay, that's like violation number 2. Yeah, right? So we go, he said, "Well, we're going to just go in and, you know, I'll put some ice on your knee." And he had whatever he had, and I had Shirley Temples, and he said, "We'll go out tomorrow morning." And I'm like, "Yeah, the hell we will." Well, guess where we were tomorrow morning? We went back out. And thank God that we did, because at the age of 16 then, we were in Jackson Hole, again, a place that we had spent a lot of time. And I ended up making a small division of the U.S. ski team. So I was a part of that, which was wonderful, and I loved it. And it was, you know, and then then we have to go water skiing. Well, I didn't want to go water skiing. I like snow skiing. And he's like, "Well, I didn't buy this boat for you guys to sit on it." And so he threw us into the lake. So here we go. So sure enough, we pop up, you know, I pop up, he puts us, you know, on these skis. So here we are. So I guess I'm glad I got his athletic ability and maybe his competitiveness in a way that I didn't know. You know, mindfully, I think he had such a strong mind about him that was amazing. You know, he never bragged. He just continued to do a lot of things. He and I together, once we moved here to Arizona, we kept going to like IndyCar races, and we went to Suns games and Cardinal games, and you know, the standard family dinners and barbecues, which he loved to do, and the traveling to the cabins, which we had done in our younger years in Wyoming. It was something we always had done. I had then started my own family. Very important part of my dad's everyday life. He loved having his family around. You know, and my mother and he were very instrumental in my two children's lives. And, you know, we obviously, you know, love being with them. There were times, I assure you, that my children's respect and love for him was unconditional as it was for them. So Dad was an incredible leader, an unusual, incredible leader, as we've heard tonight, right? Both at work and as well as at home. He was remarkably, his ability to consistently call you out on your stuff and do it in a way that you felt safe. He laid down the law totally unapologetically, never let you off the hook, and he did it in a way that made it easier, not effortless, but it made it easier, and it made you grow from it, right? And that's something you don't see too often, somebody who can do that. In closing this beautiful celebration this evening, I would be remiss if I didn't take a couple more minutes to just thank a few special people. Dr. Gary Nagamoto, I know you're out there somewhere. Where is he? I probably don't even get him. All right. Yeah, well, you know, you were there. You were just there from the beginning to the end of everything. And I hope that we could reciprocate some comfort to you, as you know how my dad felt about you as well. You know, he adored you, and it had to be nerve-wracking for you to be taking care of him, because he was not a good patient at all, as all of you know. So, I don't know. And there are many other physicians and friends and colleagues that we should thank tonight, and I wish we had the time to do that. I honestly do. But I do have to say, I still laugh and smile at the retirement party when a few of us, when you guys would bring up about getting called to Dr. Happel's office, right? It was like going to the principal's office, and I've been down that road too. And he does. But again, it was, you knew you were in for it, but again, you knew you'd be better for it. That's just the way that man was. And that's what's been talked about here tonight, right? He just had that way about him. It's a very special thing that most people don't, right, have. So, and Dr. Bees, thank you so much for taking over for him as Chief Medical Officer. When we thought he'd be walking out of the hospital for the last time, you know, your assistance in his healthcare needs, for us to thank you for everything from our family. Mark Slider, thank you for your support, along with your amazing team in different departments. Again, throughout the hospitals, Chandler and Mercy, and all the things related to my dad. And I know you kind of walked into all of this, but you've been a very good support, for sure. And the foundation board, Julie, Eric, Cleo, everybody, wow. You guys have been there every step of the way, supporting us as a family and helping us, you know, just, you guys sent the pick-me-up flowers on the days that you never thought you needed them, but you did, and they just happened to show up. but you have been one step ahead of everything, for sure. You all carried the weight on your shoulders, and we can't thank you enough for that. Kemp Miller, he's probably already gone. He probably already slipped out. But again, this man continues to never disappoint, and he always has, you know, the perfect elegance and the touch on making everything so wonderful, for sure. Chef Giddy, I hope you're still around. Thank you for your endless hours and preparing such amazing food, and so much of the food that my father would have loved, and I hope you all enjoyed it. You know, I was a proud member of this foundation 18 years ago, and I continue to be very proud. And now the torch is passed on to my family. And my daughter, Alexis, is now a board member, and she and her husband, Garrett, have started an endowment in my dad's name. It is helping sports within our community, which is wonderful. And to my son, Austin, he's not serving on the board, but as my dad used to always say, one day we're all going to be working for him. He thinks that he's the quiet one, but yeah, we're all going to be working for him someday. So how great is that? You know, my dad left quite an imprint in these hospitals, for sure. And the Happel family we fully intend to keep this partnership and all that has been developed with him fully alive. He gave his whole life to this, and you all gave something to him in return that fed him, right? So, thank you all from the bottom of our heart for this evening. It means the world to us. And by the way, he left me a note that said, no celebration of life, but I think we pulled it off.
Thank you, Dana. Well, it's been a wonderful evening of tributes. But as Dr. Nakamoto said earlier today, the best tribute you can give Dr. Happel is to continue to do the right thing when nobody's looking, and make the tough stance when it's appropriate, be compassionate when it's appropriate, and be a Renaissance man or woman. His ability to touch different individuals in different facets of life is remarkable. I'd like to bring up our chaplain, Arbaugh, to close us in prayer tonight. And we thank you from the bottom of the family's heart for showing up and paying tribute to Dr. Happel.
Thank you again, everybody, for being here. Please stick around afterward for refreshments and continue to share stories. Let's pray. God of peace, we give thanks for the life and the legacy of Dr. Terry Happel, for all that he accomplished and who he was in our community. We give thanks for his family and how they shared him with us so generously, that we might benefit from his servant leadership, and that we find hope and comfort in the promises of that which is to come. There is space that remains, and in that space, Terry's absence tells a testimony of a life well lived, of one who loved well and who was loved and who loved others well. I pray that we might honor and celebrate such a life by carrying the torch forward and living out a mission of service to others, that one day we too shall leave a print so deep and so wide. Thank you for being with us this evening and for blessing our time together. As we go from this place, may we go in grace and peace. Amen.
You're going to be able to get them.